Resident Evil's Spencer Mansion is a life-or-death slash course in scarcity that wrote a genre's rulebook in blood and ink ribbons. It's a clockwork crucible made of stairways and statues that demands mastery to unlock, and its interior was scratched into our cerebellums from the second stars slammed shut the front doors. When Resident Evil released in 1996, there wasn't a name for what it was trying to be yet. Capcom's marketing wizards coined the instantly immortal term survival horror, but the average PlayStation owner had no idea what that meant.
Resident Evil.
Rezi's brand of visceral mechanical tension was new to players who had spent their summer doing the Macarena and welcoming Space Jam to the Slam, their gaming tastes firmly rooted in power fantasy and forward momentum. PC gamers enjoyed their fair share of cerebral horror, but on consoles, a genre that had mechanically peaked at Splatterhouse suddenly had to walk us through complex ideas like route optimization, bottomless item boxes, and herbicide titration. Spencer Mansion was built to teach us. Survival horror matured in the 6 years after the first Resident Evil. Dozens of imitators had us awkwardly pivoting our aim at velociraptors and Soviet sea monsters. By 2002, the fixed POV era had been thoroughly explored, and it was time for one last romp through these hollowed halls before the cameras came off the wall.
Wow, what a mansion!
What lessons hide within the recursive spirals at the soul of Spencer Manor? How did a remake mess with our muscle memory and capture lightning in a bottle twice? And where does the mansion stand among the pantheon of sacred gaming spaces? We'll get to the root of all that and more in The Art of the Level, Resident Evil's Spencer Mansion.
Damn it! Make for that mansion!
Clearly impressed with his triumphant take on Goof Troop for the SNES, Capcom tapped up-and-coming designer Shinji Mikami to make a game similar to Sweet Home, a Famicom RPG about poorly equipped survivors who navigate a haunted mansion, juggle limited inventory, and wait patiently for doors to swing open. Mikami's game would take the top-down RPG into the third dimension and substitute the supernatural for something far more soggy. Evil dolls and ectoplasm were replaced with messy sci-fi body horror that could sink its teeth in you. A lethal biohazard that lived up to the name. Project 3D Horror went through a lot of revisions during its well-documented development before ultimately finding its chillingly mundane premise: a crew of cops trapped in a contemporary adversarial structure where the only way out is through.
Kill, run for that house!
Welcome to Spencer Mansion. Resident Evil begins with what's left of Alpha Team locked inside a cavernous foyer, alone, afraid, and unable to jump, with rabid mutant hounds at their heels. Doors and neoclassical columns surround our heroes in all directions as a red carpet on the tiled marble floor guides their gaze upstairs and a sweeping wraparound balcony. There were a lot of sweeping wraparound balconies in the 90s. Many games saw fit to include a bespoke tutorial zone in the early 3D era, a place for gamers to get their C-button legs as they wrapped their minds around a new dimension.
Stay alert!
In 1996, that meant big, wide-open living spaces with grand staircases, stained glass windows, and walls adorned with paintings. Lara Croft climbed crates in her stately crib the same year Mario BLJ'd his way across Peach's castle. Palatial homes are tailor-made for 3D exploration, and Spencer Mansion is no exception, with roughly symmetrical wings, verticality, and looping paths behind progression locks which remain closed to you just yet. An in-engine cutscene steers you immediately into a vast dining hall, dominated by a massive table, an oppressively ticking clock, and a statue looming near the broken banister above. Depending on your chosen player character, Jill Valentine or Chris Redfield, you're either sent to investigate an adjoining room or left to do so of your own volition.
See if you can find any other clues.
Step into the deceptively cozy named Tea Room and receive your first real test. It's multiple choice. A ghastly creature feasts on the corpse of your fallen comrade Kenneth and meets your shocked stare with its own dull gaze. You have a few options when you regain control. You can slash away from melee range with your dinky knife in a costly, clumsy battle. Jill can waste precious bullets. The unarmed Chris doesn't even have that luxury. Now, the correct answer is to turn and sprint back to the relative safety of the dining room, where bearded girl dad Barry Burton blows the monster away with his Colt Python.
Let me take care of this.
Barry's backup only appears in Jill's path, and he'll dispatch the zombie whether you squandered your ammo or never went into the tea room at all. There's a lot of interesting permutations of the opening, but the lesson stays the same. In one tense sequence and several door loading screens, we learned almost everything there is to know about survival horror. Resources are precious, our protagonists are awkward, ill-equipped, and squishy, and most fights are better off avoided. This was not the most familiar concept during the reign of Duke Nukem.
Damn, I'm looking good.
For all its many changes, the Resident Evil remake retains most of this introduction, starting in the dining room and dealing with the same follically challenged fiend, though later he becomes part of the game's biggest twist. Back in the foyer, Chris finds a gun and Jill gets a lockpick from Barry, who offers the most quotable compliment in gaming history.
Here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
He also advises her to stay on the first floor, while Jill announces her intention to check the double doors.
I'll try the door on the opposite side.
But not before doing a mandatory lap of the room to give you one last chance to safely wrangle with the strange controls. Resident Evil doesn't often offer much overt direction, but it's good at suggesting towards the critical path in an era unbesplotched with yellow paint. It should be clear by this point that Jill acts as the game's de facto easy mode, which goes unlabeled in the game's English version. It's an immersive and non-judgmental way to give new players a slightly easier time with tweaks more considered than just extra health. She's got several get-out-of-jail-free cards and built-in shortcuts that blend seamlessly into the story. Here's where things split. In 1996, most of the entrance hall doors are unlocked, and you're now free to explore the mansion as you see fit. You can check out that strange shotgun on the wall, shove some boxes around, or step outside for some fresh air and local fauna. When you're ready, swing by the storeroom for the sword key, or skip it completely as Jill. Her lockpick lets her bypass puzzle chains and open up the estate for exploration early on. The remake begins with a more rigid structure. The revamped foyer locks you out of many early pathing options, funneling you towards two routes that didn't exist before: a new corridor behind poor Kenneth's corpse and a painting concealing a graveyard passage, both of which are required to acquire the now mandatory sword key. Rerouted through unfamiliar territory, Resi veterans are immediately made aware that the 2002 game is more than a coat of paint. Small changes at the start will compound throughout our journey, leading to familiar yet wildly different experiences across the 6-year leap. Resident Evil's entrance and dining hall sequence is extremely successful at setting the stage for what's to come across both games. The initial venture into Spencer's estate is an all-time classic act of onboarding that rubs shoulders with legendary tutorial levels like 1-1 or the Central Highway of Mega Man X. The whole mansion is, really, and it's time we talked about its architects. Not counting the connected structures, Umbrella founder Oswell E. Spencer's stately Midwestern manor contains 58 rooms between its post-Gothic revival walls, 56 in the remake. Among them are 3 bedrooms, numerous art galleries, a piano bar, a greenhouse with no windows, a giant crushing ceiling trap, a small antechamber honoring a stuffed deer head, and exactly 1 toilet. Sins like the lone kitchen crammed in the basement and minor drainage issues can all be forgiven because the Spencer Mansion is little more than a sham, a pair of Groucho Marx glasses lazily disguising the labs and catacombs and aquatic habitats lurking below. The staff largely sleeps in a separate dormitory, tuckered out from their days of pushing around statues and rigorous journaling. It looks, sounds, and smells like a mansion, but it's not, and as a player, it's easy to feel a sense of uncanny otherness when wandering its various and sundry storerooms. The man behind the manor was George Trevor, famous for designing buildings with tricksy puzzles and secret passages, making him all the rage of New York's architectural cognoscenti. Spencer engaged his expertise to build a replica of his aristocratic English home deep within the mountains of an ambiguous US state, then invited Trevor and his family to stay as guests when construction wrapped. None of them would ever leave. Trevor wandered the halls he designed, searching for his missing wife and daughter, only to discover that he'd forgotten the solution to his own puzzles. Adrift without a Prima guide, he starved to death within his creation. It's a shame Trevor didn't live to see the modern escape room renaissance, because the man could have conjured up a mean blacklight riddle. Players wouldn't learn any of this in 1996. Trevor's story was cut, along with the graveyard and other areas later restored in 2002. As a result, the titular evil residence didn't have a proper name at first, with early materials and the unproduced George Romero screenplay referring to it as the Arklay Mansion. The lore leaked via Japanese companion books and S.D. Perry's novelizations before Code Veronica made it canon in 2000, complete with an Antarctic replica of the iconic facade. Whatever its name, you can't learn fear from a floor plan. The terror of the Spencer Mansion is experiential, emerging as you navigate the labyrinth with no clue what lurks around the corner. A lot of this special flavor comes courtesy of technical limitations. The only actual 3D entities are characters, enemies, and items projected onto pre-rendered images and in the remake videos with collision boundaries mapped out. The camera is completely out of our control, switching harshly when we cross an invisible line that signals the next room or perspective. These fixed angles arose from necessity. Resident Evil would have been a first-person shooter if the PlayStation hardware could have handled it. When the initial vision proved impossible, the devs pulled a very 2020s move and looked to France for inspiration.
Now I've done it. Sorry, Jill.
Infogram's 1992 computer classic Alone in the Dark is strikingly similar to Resident Evil, maybe even more so than Sweet Home, though it hits much differently. Resi is far more mechanically minded and slickly presented, with badass SWAT people in cool uniforms subbing for the dweeby Edward Carnby. Carnby is no boulder-smashing He-Man, and he's probably not showing up in a crossover fighter anytime soon, but he is scrambling through a sprawling, ornate house festooned with zombies and a giant boss monster plant. Shinji Mikami was reluctant to admit the influence for years, but Derceto Manor is clearly a hypothesis that Spencer resoundingly confirms. Mikami, planner Hideki Kamiya, and the entire Capcom Planning Room 2 team weaponized their limitations to inform the mansion's design. Dramatic angles, unseen threats, and claustrophobic corridors that force confrontation as you squeeze past the lumbering undead. Low on-screen character counts meant every enemy had to be a genuine threat, with truly constructed encounters that equal the most tense and atmospheric cinema. A window cracking under pressure, a moan of untraceable origin, a spider scurrying just out of sight overhead. We remember our time in the Spencer Mansion so well because the camera would not let us look away. The lens dares to venture where our modern right sticks seldom do, and the detached, candid point of view does wonders for our sense of the mansion as a space. It's almost voyeuristic, like reading through someone's secret skincare routine. We don't see Spencer through our avatar's eyes, we observe them existing among its nooks and crannies, weak and outgunned, and following the invisible pattern that leads them deeper into the mansion's mysteries. "1996 was a red-letter year for the art of speedrunning. 4 years after Doom sparked the scene and months before Quake turned it into a global community, Resident Evil arrived to reward dedicated players for a different kind of virtuosity, one that valued planning, routing, and a deep understanding of the mansion's layout. Unlockable rocket launchers weren't the only incentive to clear the house as fast as possible. In an era where memory cards cost extra, plenty of people tackled the mansion in a single sitting out of necessity, learning speedrunning without even realizing it. You had to find the most efficient route to beat the game before your folks needed the TV to watch Suddenly Susan. Optimization reveals a lot about level design. It separates the signal from noise and exposes the creator's true intentions. That's according to developer Chris Pruitt, who mathematically dissected the Spencer Mansion to reveal the expansive spiral at its heart, a phenomenon he called recursive unlocking. Pruitt analyzed a 90-minute, 100% completion speedrun of Resident Evil Director's Cut and recorded every room transition with timestamps, unveiling the pattern behind the game's progression. The mansion's map begins fairly limited. You scamper around available spaces, searching for progress and trying not to get killed. A new key can open 6 or 7 doors, creating a larger but still finite space to find a solution that unlocks the next hotspot. Spencer Mansion almost always widens the activity area and rarely cuts you off from the old, expanding simultaneously in forward and reverse. There's new stuff to explore, but some revelations will return you from whence you came. Backtracking has become a bad word in gaming discourse, but few do it better than Resident Evil, and not as often as you'd expect. Pruitt's data found 116 unique nodes in the original game, and that the optimal path visits 213 of them in total, most of which are passed through only twice. Nearly 40% of the game's screens require just one visit, and 19 rooms can be skipped entirely. There are some exceptions, but as designed, only a few spaces are absolutely necessary to revisit multiple times. The average player's path will, of course, be anything but optimal. You'll stumble into skippable rooms in search of items and answers, and get lost figuring out aggravating puzzles. But along the way, you're committing the mansion to your mind, filing away every fancy keyhole and askance weather vane you were forced to limp past, ready to exploit them whenever you acquire the next thingy. Initial playthroughs won't always look alike, as decisions lead to different experiences. Chris's frankly pathetic fanny pack necessitates brain-draining logic puzzles with every venture from a save room, while Jill's lockpick bypasses entire sections he has to solve with keys.
Here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
Think you can make it out of there with a bunch of chemicals in your inventory instead of fresh mags and first aid sprays? Or would you rather deal with Plant 42 the hard way?
Barry!
Jill!
Is Richard really worth using some special serum to save?
Here's the serum.
How far would you go to bring redemption to Barry Burton or keep Rebecca Chambers alive?
I'm Rebecca.
If games are a series of interesting choices, then the Spencer Mansion is positively stuffed with them, but you generally end up in the same place by the end. Eventually, you'll stop going through the wrong doors and retracing your steps to dead ends, cursing your mistakes as you realize halfway through a loading screen that you've only brought one of the jewels you need to stuff in a large feline's eye socket. You'll learn which spaces are worth cleansing of monsters, the crucial shortcuts and connections you'll return to time and time again. Pruitt's data found that even in a perfect run, the winding northeast corridor that connects to the courtyard requires 8 separate visits. It's the most frequented room, but there are plenty of other natural aorta and ventricles to keep you circulating throughout Spencer. Soon, you'll know these passages like the back of your beret. The mansion changes as you progress. Around the halfway point, you return from a long excursion away from the main edifice and return for a second big loop of the space. Upon arrival, we're shown that the slow lumbering corpses to which we've become accustomed have been replaced with nasty green hunters. Your first major backtrack to familiar territory comes with drastically raised stakes, and paths once thought mastered now demand new respect. Mikami himself noticed how much players relied on the East Wing storeroom and personally placed 2 hunters there to mess with you specifically. Then comes the last circuit. After getting the helmet key, killing the giant snake, and finding the last doodads needed to access the laboratory, you face one more trek across the infested mansion to reach the underground entrance. The entire map is open to you now, crawling with the deadliest threats the game can muster. But by this point, your mind has achieved dominion over its halls. It's your last lap through a house that hates you. Only now, it feels like home. Survival horror shares a lot of the above design principles with Metroidvanias, progression locked behind impassable barriers as we search the map for the various goobers that open the way. The key difference is that in survival horror, the tools that unlock the critical path don't really level up our avatars. Instead, we find keys and crests and fake keys and fake crests and arrows and stone and metal objects, none of which do us any favors beyond taking up precious space. Our empowerment is mental rather than mechanical, the hard-won spatial literacy that the house beats into us. And 6 years later, Spencer Mansion would use that knowledge to hurt us even more.
Something about that mansion still bothers me, but I think I'll stay here a little longer.
Auteurs rarely redo their own work, and when they do, it's usually to take advantage of bigger budgets and newer technology. Michael Mann upgraded his TV movie LA Takedown into the star-studded Heat. Shinji Mikami had no intention of demolishing Spencer Mansion and rebuilding it from the foundation. At first, he had no greater ambition than updating his career-making games graphics using the power of the GameCube to create a timeless showcase that still looks tremendous today. New aesthetics cast the Spencer Mansion in a very different light. The original Resident Evil is bright and sterile, rooms were clean, floors barely textured, and clutter kept to a minimum for the SGI workstations that spent days rendering it all. It feels empty in an eerie overlook way, like everyone who worked there was suddenly raptured, leaving only their herb stashes, personal correspondence, and piles of handgun ammunition as evidence of their existence. Mikami's remake drowns the mansion in darkness and decay. Pre-rendered backgrounds are now stunning tableaus with flickering candlelight and real-time shadows, magnificent environments frozen forever in 480p amber that decades of upscaling still can't quite recapture. Exploring Spencer Mansion hits different in the remake. Lightning flashes illuminate rooms and shadows swallow corridors whole. The mansion is grimier and aged, living up to Mikami's drive for real feeling. It's beautiful and terrifying in a trad horror way, but the newfound verisimilitude sacrifices the lo-fi liminality of the original. Less backrooms, more House on Haunted Hill, and it's up to you to decide which you like better, but the wetter, more oppressive aesthetic is a good complement for the more substantial changes in store.
Start talking.
Late in development, after the team had spent months rebuilding Spencer Mansion, Mikami changed his mind. It wasn't enough for the game to look nicer, it had to taste different, like a bitter beer to snap jaded survival horror heads out of their comfort zones. At first, he toyed with making all enemies invisible by default, but he mercifully abandoned that idea and landed on something that was somehow more sadistic. Nearly every zombie killed in the Resident Evil remake will come back to life again in a faster, stronger, more hardy form called Crimson Heads. As long as a zombie dies with their skull or limbs intact, they'll be resurrected on a randomly determined timetable. You can prevent it from happening, but it's going to cost you. The mechanic completely reformats your approach to Spencer Mansion. Backtracking becomes a minefield of your own making as rooms you cleared hours ago spring back to life with glowing-eyed berserkers. Even the very first zombie from your tea room meet cute comes back, adding a diabolical twist to a space you thought was safe. If you do take down a zombie, you can only stop their resurrection by burning the body with kerosene. You can only carry 2 uses at a time, it's hidden all around the mansion, and there's not nearly enough of it to torch every corpse in the joint. You'll be dodging and sprinting past far more enemies than you ever did in the original, your mental map transforming into a resource allocation puzzle. Which hallways are worth purging with your limited fuel? Which routes can you afford to leave infested? Veteran players learn which areas they'll never revisit, but doors no longer offer the same peace of mind. The original Resident Evil discouraged killing, the remake punishes you severely for it. Structural changes run just as deep. Only 2 rooms are missing from the original game, more have been completely reimagined, and pretty much everything has been moved around. Now, shuffled item locations might not seem like a big deal, but the route itself is fundamentally changed. The original way to the laboratory required finding 4 crests, which the remake swaps for death masks. Capcom, never ones to let a good crest go to waste, cheekily repurposed the classics as a method to unlock the Magnum instead. The path to Disc 2 takes you through a graveyard, a forest, catacombs, and a giant torchlit altar, forcing you into terrifying encounters against Lisa Trevor, long-lost daughter of George. She's endured 28 years of Umbrella experiments in the labs beneath the mansion. Her bloodstream is the bedrock for every virus in the franchise, and she's utterly unkillable. Fighting her is fruitless. The best you can do is dodge and run, putting everything you learned about evasion and retreat to the test. It's pure problem solving under lethal pressure. The mansion's core design distilled into a trial you must survive before you're worthy of its true secrets. By 2002, we had been simmering in survival horror stew for 6 years, killing dozens of zombies and BOWs by the boatload. Mikami knew we had gotten comfortable. He had taught us too well. So instead of a streamlined tribute to his past glory, he tormented and tested us with curveball after killer curveball. Remake's cruelest trick is the way it weaponizes our familiarity. The dogs that famously crashed through the hallway window save their powder for our second trip through, after we've exhaled in relief, assured that we must have recalled that classic jump scare wrong. Get too comfortable with a certain doorknob and it breaks off in our hand, forcing us to take the long way around the highly trafficked east staircase for the rest of the game. It was no longer the mansion we once trusted, but that's okay because we weren't the same kind of players anymore.
Take care.
Yeah.
Resident Evil's remake took every lesson learned from a generation of tank controls and pre-rendered backgrounds and molded the Spencer estate into a fiendish masterclass, the swan song to a golden age of survival horror and a brutal triumph of reinvention. There's always a tinge of melancholy in Resident Evil games when you leave the spiraling puzzle box behind and descend into the more sterile worlds of secret labs and military installations that inevitably lie beyond. It's hard not to fall in love with these intimate, intricate spaces, to fondly reminisce on every brilliant shortcut and chill save room sesh bathed in green herb glow. Spencer Mansion is where we fell head over heels with survival horror and where we renewed our vows with it. It will always have a place in our hearts so long as they're still beating. Therein lies the genius of Spencer Mansion, a holy space that reinvented itself as drastically as the genre it defined, teaching us new lessons even when we thought we knew everything there was to know.
Wow. What a mansion!
Thanks for watching, everyone, and now it's time to let us know, what is your favorite room in the Spencer Mansion? Both versions. Do you like tickling the ivories in the piano room? Do you feel like pushing a bunch of statues around surrounded by suits of armor? Or do you want to hit some buttons under paintings of babies and old people? Leave a comment, let us know, and make sure you stay tuned to IGN for all your Resident Evil needs.